Good afternoon. Welcome to Refresh. It's a time to be connected, right? To be inspired, to learn something new, and feel a bit better for this time spent together. And that's what Generation W is all about. A shout out to all who participated in Giving Tuesday. Was that you? You can nod your heads. I probably can't see you, but you'll know it's you. On behalf of Generation W, we want to thank you for your contributions, for your thoughtfulness. But I have to tell you, it's a great feeling to see all the incredible work being done by not-for-profits around the world. And it's all being done on behalf of our greater good. It's nice to feel this coming together around issues and mostly around people, about things that are important to us, right? Our fellow humans and their well-being and our collective investment in this feeling of a greater good, something that's bigger than ourselves. I don't know. It's truly about goodness and goodness being of great importance. And I don't know, it just feels good, especially this time of year, but truthfully, all time of the year. And speaking of goodness and great and the greater good, today we are so happy to announce our first official partner of Refresh. And when we think of Refresh and the conversations we have, what comes to mind? But a great glass of wine, of course. So today we are so happy to welcome Teneral Sellers. Teneral Sellers is an entrepreneurial agent for social change. It's a woman-owned and run empowerment community that supports women's causes and industry inclusion through the production and sale of phenomenal wine. Right? Let's just get down to it. Phenomenal wine. Jill Oser is their founder and force of nature. She's a good friend, and she'll be joining us after the holidays. And honestly, I can't wait for all of you to hear her story and the mission of this new and powerful brand, and of course, the phenomenal wine. Another great reason to launch this particular relationship right now, because it's the spirit of giving. And Teneral will give 10% of all of their 3-pack sales to Generation W. Yes, our work on behalf of women and girls gets furthered when you drink wine. I can't think of a better connection. So drink up, everyone. And if anyone's interested, perhaps when the whole community has ordered their wine, we can have a tasting together. We can have one of those great winemakers, Jill, join us and share their secrets to the grapes. It will be a great way to celebrate. So thank you, Jill Oser, and to Teneral Sellers for this great relationship. We really appreciate your support. Last week, I don't know if for those of you who are with us, Dr. Carl Marcy, the amazing neuroscientist and psychiatrist, spoke about how it's better for us to talk about physical distancing rather than social distancing. The fact remains that the thing we need most is the social aspect of our lives. It's hardwired in our brains. No matter how it is delivered, like today, right? We are not physically together, obviously. I'm here with the puppies who I love and they give me comfort, right? But it is about the social connections that we create, and we can't let them go. It's really critical to our well-being and our sense of humanity. As we are aware, COVID has been the great revealer of so much, laying bare social inequities, the stark contrast between what we say we value and how we behave. It's become a time for social and personal reckonings. I don't know, I feel like the longer it goes on, I know the end's in sight, but I feel these real strong personal pivot points where important decisions on how we want to live our lives, how do we want to contribute to our greater lives moving forward, not to mention our personal lives. Will we continue this wokeness around racial injustice and drive to change implicit bias and systemic racism? We just need to ask ourselves that question. You see, because we are part of that answer every day. What we do helps to answer that question. We see the same with another issue that's come to the fore among so many, and that's the disproportionate impact that COVID has had on women in the workplace. 900, I think it was 845, but nearly 900,000 women alone left the workplace in October, having to choose between family and their job or health and their job. This could be a generational shift for women's progress in the workplace, which is troubling after so much hard work to create equity and opportunity, which honestly we have to understand, which we will do today, has tremendous impact for all of us. It is in the interest of our greater good to ensure that there is equity and equality across the board. And that's what research shows us consistently. Race, gender, ethnicity is a collective investment in our collective benefit and betterment, economic, social, cultural, all of the metrics. And that's why I am so grateful today that David Smith and Brad Johnson are here with us. They are the good guys, and they will tell us more about themselves, of course, but they've written a book called Good Guys: How Men Can Be Better Allies for Women in the Workplace. And now, for those of you who know, I am a team sport player. I do believe life is the ultimate team sport, and that in order for us to win or play better or succeed, we need great teammates. And we're not going to really succeed at levels we want in any of the issues that we're facing without holding hands and connecting and becoming team oriented. So with that, I am really happy to say hi, David. Hi, Brad.
Hi, Donna.
Hey, Donna.
How you guys doing?
Good. Thanks for having us today.
Well, I am so happy that you guys here. Let's just start out with the fundamental question. Why? Right? So like I reached out, I wanted a lot of guys to come. There are a lot of women on this show today. We want to feel like we're in this together, but why should men care? And you know what? Why should we all care about this? Why is it so important?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll start, and Brad, if you want to jump in there when you're ready. You know, it's one of the things that drew us in particular to this topic of creating equity broadly, right? Not just, you know, gender is just one of the lenses we're looking at it here in particular, but is that, you know, often we find in our research and just our everyday, the work that we do with the people around us, that when people hear about, you know, gender diversity or any form of diversity, you know, often men look at that and they go, oh, that's not for me. That's not me. I don't have a role there. And, you know, gender equity really is about creating, again, a fair and level, just playing field for everyone out there. And that's not a woman's issue, right? Because that's, I think, to a large degree, what we found is that, you know, women have advanced, I think, about as far and as fast as they can. And if we, you know, the research, I think places have seen like 200 plus years it's going to take to get rid of the gender pay gap and to get rid of, you know, to create equity out there if men don't get involved. And, you know, and again, that's why we have to really get men engaged in this and show that they do have a role, and it is important to them for a variety of different reasons. And that's something that we often forget, is that, you know, men, besides obviously the obvious benefits to advancing women themselves, but our organizations are more successful when we have more gender diversity across all levels of leadership out there. You know, our society and our families are more successful, right? There's an economic benefit here for our families, which benefits our society because we're spending more money out there. Our families are safer, our families are healthier when we're doing these things. And so it's good for, you know, not just for women, but it's good for society. And then there's the, you know, if we're going to do something self-interested, there's a WIFM here. What's in it for me, for the guys out there? And they, hey, as men, as leaders, we become more successful as well, by the way. We become better leaders in terms of, you know, the fact that we have access to all kinds of information we wouldn't have otherwise had when we have more relationships, good, positive relationships with women in the workplace. And we find they have better networks. And I think one of the most powerful things that we learned was really around the fact that the enhanced interpersonal skills that we as men gain when we have, again, more women in the organizations we're in, because we have more relationships with them now in the workplace, and that interpersonal relationships, and it really speaks to the empathy and the EQ. And who doesn't want more of that in their leaders? And the great thing about that is at the end of the day, when, you know, we get to go home, we don't check that at the door, we get to take that home, and we're better parents, we're better partners. And so there's, again, it's not just a single dimension of where this adds benefit. It adds benefits at multiple levels out there.
Right. I that makes me just jump to this point in our conversation that we had, Brad. I think it was you who said this. We're going to talk about gender equality in the workplace, and you have specific tactics and strategies and skills we will talk about. But I love when you fundamentally said this: gender equality begins at home.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Donna. That's one of the most important points I think Dave and I can share with you today, and with the audience, that too often when Dave and I get in front of a group of men, right, and we're talking about better allyship for women in the workplace, a lot of guys are like, "Yeah, okay, give me the skills and the tools," and they're shocked when Dave and I say, "Actually, dudes, you got to start this at home. You don't get to pass go. You don't get to show up in the workplace and throw on your ally cape for the women you work with if you're not doing this at home." So guys who are partnered with women, it's really quite incongruent for us to champion women that we work with when we're not pulling our weight at home, because we're not ever going to get to equity. We're never really going to level the playing field if women are bearing the lion's share of domestic work, all the unpaid work, and now during the pandemic, that includes homeschooling, but it's always included domestic chores around the house, childcare. Women before the pandemic were doing about 50% more than men. Now we find they're doing, almost 3 times more. And so it's been described as, this double or triple jeopardy that women are facing. And that's to your point, Donna, of why women are leaving the workplace. So we find men often assume they're doing more than they're actually doing. If they're partnered with someone, they assume they're carrying more weight at home. And so we encourage guys, you got to go home and ask your partner, am I doing my share, right? When it comes to all those things I just mentioned. And by the way, let me add one more. How about the cognitive emotional labor? And these are those lists that women tend to keep in their head, about groceries and children's clothing sizes and upcoming planning for a family trip. We guys tend to not engage in that. We don't do it. It always falls to women. So go home, do an audit, and say, how am I doing? We call this a domestic partner audit. And then when you get the feedback, don't be defensive. Just say, hey, I appreciate the feedback. What can I do to get better? So we have to do this at home if we want women to have an equal shot at work. It's not fair, of course, if they're carrying more of the unpaid burden at home. This is also great for our sons and daughters. We find that when daughters grow up in a home where a father is really leaning into this as a full-on domestic partner, she's more likely to persist in her career. She's more likely to go into non-traditional fields. Our sons, when they see a father role modeling that, they're more likely to show up in the workplace later as guys who expect egalitarian relationships with women at work. So this is where you begin. This is how it starts, and this is how we begin to really change the playing field for women at work.
Uh, Joy Kurtz, I love Joy. She always has some great things to say. Dare I say, behind every great man, there is a woman. Well, you know what? I think what we want to do is we want to be walking side by side, right? Or you're right. That's I think where we want to be. I want to say hello to Erin Colwell as always. Hey, Jeannie Miller, nice to see you. Mary Lee Kingsley, Marta Pretel. It's wonderful that you guys are all joining us on our Zoom. Hey, David, Charlie, glad you made it. Debbie Banks, Debbie Buckland. Oh, I'm telling you, this is really fantastic. Guys, please make sure you send your questions. Lisa Tepper, appreciate that. Marie Monahan, she's working with our Elevate group here in Jacksonville on the elevation of women and our ability to communicate to companies the value of gender equality in the workplace. Sometimes I find that, and it's well documented, that when you are part of a dominant group, and it's easy to refer to race, right? When we talk about white privilege, we talk about male privilege. When you're so comfortable in the world that you live in, that you do not recognize that it exists in any other way for anyone else. And so in the workplace, and many women work in very male dominated industries, some not as much, you realize that sometimes we take it as being an affront, and perhaps ultimately it is, if we're not recognized for the values we bring, as opposed to people just being unaware, especially men being unaware because they've lived in a community that speaks and acts like them forever, right? How would I know any different? How do we cross that first barrier?
Yeah. And so I think, gets to the crux of one of the issues that we start with in the book. And that's, showing the fact that, for the most part, a lot of work has been created by men for men to do men's goals and objectives out there. And so it's a really comfortable place to be if you're a dude. And I say this all the time. I was talking to somebody the other day and saying, yeah, when we think about careers, for example, it's really easy for us as guys because I can just look around and for the most part, the path in front of me of what I should do next, where I should go, what's important to me is really obvious and it's laid out very comfortably in front of me. And I don't even have to go look for it. It's right there in front of me all the time. Does that mean I don't have to work for it? No, I still have to work for it. Everybody does to a certain extent, but it's a lot easier for me. And I really don't have to spend a whole lot of time thinking about it. But for a lot of people, that's not the case. And for women, people of color, women of color out there, it's a very different experience in the workplace. And as again, as white majority men, I would just say that we have to become more aware of how other people experience the workplace and in very toxic ways sometimes. And without that awareness, it's really hard to fix and to make change, to fix the problems that are out there. And this is one of the challenges I think around allyship is Brad and I talking to guys about this, that they often go, like, well, what's my role? Or I don't even understand the problem. It's like, yeah, exactly. You need to go understand the problem. So you got to self-educate. You got to understand, attend webinars, lectures, read. There's tons of great information out there. Become more aware, and then put it in the context of what's going on in your workplace, and compare that to people in your workplace, the women that you work with. How are they experiencing it? And begin to have those conversations, which can be very uncomfortable, I think, for some of us out there. I'll just be very frank about that. That again, a lot of guys are not comfortable asking about that. And so one of the things that we often tell guys is that, hey, it's okay. Understand that your comfort, just kind of feel it for just a minute. And then, if you're not comfortable asking her about those, then maybe ask, hey, Donna, would it be all right if I asked you about how you experience the workplace, and what's one thing I could do to make your experience better this week? Right. And so you can choose to go, I'm not really willing to talk to you about that. Or you can talk to me about it, or we can talk about it some other time. But again, I give you the option. It's not, again, you have this requirement to educate me, right? I'm not putting the onus and the burden upon you. And this is what we often find, again, with traditionally underrepresented minorities in the workplace, like women often, that the burden becomes yours. And it's like, no, the burden should be ours. Right? Those of us in the dominant.
It's interesting, David, you just said something as I'm sitting here thinking about all this, having lived my life in the corporate world and having enormous amounts of experiences. Women in many industries are not underrepresented, but they are underrepresented in leadership positions. Right? So there's lots of us, but there's not lots of us where we can have as much influence as we can, which is about now, obviously, more women on boards, more women's in the C-suite, and all of those kinds of things. And so there's the question on, and let's just call it what it is. It's about power and who has it. And when we look at the seats, let's say I always envision a round table, and there's all different people sitting in those seats. Right now, we'll talk about corporate boards. There's a 30% movement. So that means we're looking for 3 seats if there's 10 board members, which is kind of crazy when we're 52% of the population. But if we're 1 and we're making 2, that means a guy is giving up his seat, or it's being perceived as being taken away. And so when we're talking about a power exchange, or if it's experienced that way, as opposed to a greater good investment in better decision making, better economic returns, more equity at home, which are big, big, big sways, it's hard to get off the starting line, don't you think?
Yeah, it is, Donna. And this is another whole, important dimension, I think, about what can be an impediment, especially for men, around gender equity. And I might just sort of boil this down to the research Dave and I often look at in psychology on zero-sum bias, right? And so men can suffer from the zero-sum fallacy that, if we're supposed to bring more women into the workplace and promote them into senior leadership positions, then I'm going to lose, right? If a woman wins, if a woman moves up, then a guy loses. And this is that, erroneous black and white thinking that we call zero-sum thinking. And so we have to look at the research, got to look at the literature, got to show these guys the evidence that when you have more gender balance, when you have more women in senior leadership roles, those companies make more money, they're more successful, they're more creative, they grow, so you're going to have more positions, not fewer. You're not losing. Your whole entity, your whole company is going to expand when you have different voices included in leadership. Because then, now I'm including all the really smart, creative people, not just half the population, men. So men have got to get over the zero-sum thinking and really look at the evidence about what we stand to gain. And and the other piece of this I'll just add is there are other biases, by the way, right, that I think can keep women out of senior leadership. So when you ask men, what do you think of women? There's this clear research called the women are wonderful effect, where guys say, oh, women are awesome. I love women. Women are nice. They're,
I am
they're,
women.
yeah, they're kind, they're gentle, but what they're not saying is very important. They're not saying she's a take charge leader. I see her as a future CEO. They don't frame women as agentic leaders. And so if that bias is going on, or others like she's a ticking time bomb of maternity, right? She's not a good investment because she's going to step away and have children. If that's going on for me, I'm not pushing women forward. I'm not sponsoring them. I'm not doing what I could do to level the playing field.
Oh, without a doubt. And it's interesting, you talk about the zero sum thinking, but women have zero sum thinking too. And that's also gotten in the way of women advancing. I think we're a whole lot better. But again, if we're that one person in the table, we need to be about thinking, I need to get the second and the third. But if in our minds it's only going to be one, then it needs to be me. And that has been a pervasive operating status for a period of time. I think that is really changing as well. But there is this collective thinking. I think we're both bound, and I heard you guys talk about this, in our roles. And we're looking like if we're gonna elevate women, in a sense, right? We are really elevating men as well. Like this is a gift. It's a social liberating gift for men to actually be who they can be more fully.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see that in a variety of different ways. And especially as you think about the younger generation of men that are coming into the workplace, not that it's exclusively with them, but we find it more predominantly that their attitudes about and their expectations about what work and family roles look like, and what, as a parent, hey, how much leave should I be taking? Should I be taking parental leave? And again, the younger generation does expect to do that. They do expect to have more of an engaged role in their kids' lives. They do expect to be more able to support their partners' careers, and in ways that, again, older generations, that was not the norm out there. But they run into this when they come into the workplace, a very traditional workplace, despite the fact that they've been raised, again, to have these more inclusive perspective about what work and family looks like. They run into these very traditional norms, and it's really frustrating for them. And this is why, again, I think to a large extent, Gen Z and the millennials have gotten a little bit of a bad rap when it comes to the fact that they bounce around companies a lot more. They're much more mobile when it comes to changing jobs out there than older generations have been, their predecessors. And a lot of that's because they're looking for the right fit, right? And sometimes it takes a little while to find that, as opposed to, again, I think my generation and my father or my grandfather's generation, when they went into the workplace, there was just a more standard norm around the traditional aspects that it fit them very neatly. But again, it's better for everybody. The junior men can now, again, form family relationships in the way they want to.
Right, right. So here's a couple of questions from our attendees. Megan wants to know, how do you get men to take responsibility or be accountable for creating more diverse environments? I mean, that really goes to the heart of your book, right? How do they become active allies? What are the steps they should be taking?
Yeah, Dave, why don't you lead off, because this is so
Yeah.
much part of your focus in research, but then I'll chime in.
Yeah, I mean, first it goes back to, as we talked about before, developing an awareness of the issues, the problems, the challenges, the differences, and how we experience the workplace, the biases, right? So taking them out of the kind of the abstract world and putting them into the practical of, hey, what does this look like in my workplace? And how can I, as I become aware of it, so, for example, maybe it's around the language we use in terms of how we evaluate each other. And there's some great research out there today that looks at, the fact that, yeah, there are different aspects of how we use language to evaluate or in performance reviews differently for men and women. Some of that language actually gets to how we value people differently. And that means uh, if I see you, for example, from a personality perspective, I think your communication or leadership style is really aggressive. Well, as a guy, being again more direct and aggressive might it actually does play out as an advantage for me from a performance review perspective. I get a bump up in my performance review. For you, you're gonna get knocked down a little bit as a woman. And this is what we find in the research. There's actually a value difference. But around a lot of things that we
Wait,
were,
hold on a second. Say that again. That's really, really important. There's a value difference related
yeah,
specifically
to aspects that find important from a workplace perspective and what we review. So from a leadership style or managerial style, for example, there's a lot of subjectivity. And this is where, again, biases and stereotypes come into play, is the more ambiguity there is around what's actually expected and where there's subjectivity and how I evaluate it, the more likely biases and stereotypes are going to come into play. So, for example, the gender differences that we find in stereotypes about communication style or leadership style of men being more direct or agentic, as Brad said earlier, I can be more aggressive in that, and I don't necessarily get penalized for that. Actually, I get a bump up in my performance reviews, probably in most cases we find for that. But women, not so much.
correct.
Women are not expected to be pushy. See, I used the word there, right?
Right.
Or oh my God, that favorite B word, bossy, right? No, I know you were thinking about the other one, but but women get labeled with those things, and it's not just that they're being labeled with it; it's that they're being devalued when it comes to things that affect pay, affect promotions, affect advancement, opportunities, and this is where we begin to see the differences come out in the workplace about the gender pay gap, or why we don't have more women in senior leadership positions out there. So it's critically important that we begin to understand where these biases are and how they affect, right, the different ways that we do our business, the business outcomes that are so critical to what we do.
True, and we really should. We really should. I mean, a couple of people have said this, and I think Jill Oster asked this question, especially around women of color and Black women, right? You have the angry Black women trope. I was part of a conversation recently, a panel discussion. It was an educational one on race for families and students. And it was interesting because a Black woman spoke up, and everyone, but it was really good. Everybody acknowledged the fact that that could be a reaction to this woman who I thought was amazing, and we acknowledged her amazingness. But that doesn't always happen, right? That carries over. And Jill says, in your research, have you seen white women recognizing they need to be allies for women of color who've had it much worse, right? And the need for systemic change to ensure more racial equity at the same time we're looking at, obviously, gender equity.
Yeah, I think that's been a critique in many ways of feminism today, is that it has not included necessarily women of color and their experiences. And I think there's been a lot more conversation over the past year or two about including and looking at the differences there in women of color's experiences. And some research, I'm doing right now with our team, we're looking at that intersection in particular around the language that's used in evaluations, leadership and performance evaluations. And there's a significant difference between, in particular, like if you look at white women versus Black women, huge differences in how they are viewed. And so it's not enough to go that all women are all men. And this is one of the, I think, the concepts is we talk to guys about this, that as you're learning about the experiences of others in the workplace, you can't just always assume that all women's experiences are the same, right? Because we know that's not true. Women of color have very
Yeah,
different experiences. It's
exactly.
not true for all men either, right? Because again,
Correct.
men have very different experiences in the workplace too. So again, apply that in your learning as you're being open to understanding there might be differences. And as you learn something about one woman's experience, check in with your other female colleagues and see, hey, is this you find this to be true for you as well in your own experience? But again, I think this intersectional aspect is critical, that we begin to value each other in the unique differences, and make sure that we see the differences and appreciate them, as opposed to becoming blind to them or not seeing difference.
Right. And today is not our time to talk about the Me Too movement per se, but there's so much intersectionality to all of this. But Trisha Melly says another underlying issue in gender equality is the unfortunate constant of sexual harassment and violence in the workplace. And that is a devaluing element, in a very, very strong way. Let me bring you Donna Cohen. Thank you for joining us, Donna Cohen. She says she's a litigator in an all-male law firm, and I'm curious, when we're talking about male-identified allies, asking women how they can be helpful, and I'd be interested to know how women, if someone came to you, so how can they be helpful? Are women able to respond in a way that you feel serves you? Frankly, if someone came up to me and asked me that question, I'm not sure how I would respond.
Yeah. That is such an important point and question, I think. And I think just to contextualize that sort of ally action a little bit more, one of the most important things I think men who aspire to be better allies have to do is the work around developing trust in relationships with women at work. And I think that I might be reluctant to go to a woman I'm working with and just make cold asks about her experience in the workplace if I haven't already done some work to develop trust, and I hadn't been a friend to her, and I hadn't shown her that I'm a safe person to talk to. So when she hears about things I say about her when she's not in the room, are those positive things? So she knows I have her back. Does she see that I'm open to learning? Does she see that I have some humility, and that I don't come off as knowing her experience or the experience of other women? I think men have to do that work first and establish trust. And I think then it's in those relationships that I'm probably going to be more inclined to get feedback from women, and have women feel more comfortable talking about some of the obstacles or headwinds they face at work.
We do have this graphic on what women can do. We can put that up and we can talk about that for a few minutes if we can. Okay, this is helpful. You guys, who wants to take this one?
Yeah, I'll start in here, and again, we always like to think about who are the guys around you. Start with the easy ones, right? Who are the men around you that are doing these things already? And again, positive reinforcement is one of those things that we know it works much better than the blaming shaming game out there, right?
Yeah,
That
I just want to
again,
recognize, David, that we have several of those on the call today. And if I start identifying them, I might miss one, and I don't want to do that. But there are several that I am aware of that are on there. But I love the idea of finding a colleague who's really doing the right things, right?
yeah, and positive reinforcement works, right? We know that. And again, people would much prefer that. Does that mean that we don't need accountability? Nope, we definitely need accountability. And to me, that goes back to that second bullet you have on your slide there about feedback, so critically important. And again, if we don't have the trusted relationships already built with women in our inner circle, right? These trusted colleagues, the peers, some of the guys that we interviewed for the book, they called them gender confidants. They're the women they could go to, who would hold them accountable, and two, they give them the direct, hey, no kidding, feedback about, hey, when I did this, how did that land? Was that okay? Did that work? To make sure that they're doing it right. And this is one of the gaps we find around allyship, is that men often think that because, and again, most men do, by the way, believe in gender equality and gender equity. And because they believe in it, they think they're doing all the work, and they think they're doing enough of the work. And this gets to the fact that no, the fact that you believe in it, that's great. I appreciate that. But here's some of the things that you're not doing. right? And the absence of that is really reinforcing the gaps that we have out there. And we need that feedback. And that's where it comes through these interactions, through the colleagues that we have. Mentoring, one of the where Brad and I really started this conversation in our first book with Athena Rising was we need more men engaged in mentoring women. And oh, by the way, we need more men who are mentored by women, because there's all these great advantages, because they get a more interaction and they learn about the things that might be unique in some ways for women, and other ways may be very similar to what we as men expect in the workplace. And how can we advance them in ways? And again, the mentoring is just a very formal way in many cases to do that, but there are lots of other interactions we can be having with colleagues at work.
Yeah, so let me just say this. A lot of the pushback that I'm getting, or at least the feedback here, is women who have taken the initiative to provide feedback for men. And they were then stereotyped with that research that you said, right? I was being pushy. I was picking on them, right? So it's
even worse, gaslight.
It's here, but unless we put this out in the open, we're not going to be able to deal with it, right? This is an issue that we have to uncover and address step by step, because it is an tremendously implicit negative force in the workplace. The guys who get it right, the women that get it right, wow, I'm telling you, it's fantastic. But we need more to be getting it right. So let's just roll this back. I'll roll this out question. Marilee, for you, I don't know. She wants to know: did the men create the glass ceiling and then create a way? It sounds like a sinister plot. So then the women can compete with each other. Do we think that that's what they did?
Yeah, that's such an interesting one. There's again, a whole stream of research on this phenomenon. I know you've heard about the queen bee phenomenon, right? That it's the notion that senior women don't pull up junior women, right? They're not helpful. They don't mentor them. They don't provide resources. And there's sort of this attitude among the few senior women that have made it, that, hey, I pulled myself up, you have to do the same. And there's only room for a couple of us. So, it's competitive. So I'm not going to help junior women. In truth, when you see women not helping each other, which is fairly rare, I think a lot of women help junior women. But when you see that, I often blame the culture, right? There's something about the culture that's communicating to women that only a couple of you are going to have an opportunity to promote. There's no space for more than one or two women. And so that breeds competition, and it's often promoted by men, the sense that there's a limited pathway forward for all women who are talented in our company. And that culture has to change. There's got to be some fundamental pushback about that. Women have to be getting different messages, that we actually do have a way forward, and men need to be demonstrating that that's true with their sponsorship and mentorship. So I blame the culture, and I push back on these false narratives that women are not willing to help other women by and large.
It's largely that part of that culture is that women know that gender or sexual harassment is prevalent in their culture, and because of that, right, that affects behavior about how you're going to look at other women, and how you're going to look at your own behavior, and how you're going to support other people out there. The other part of this is really it also reinforces a kind of a tokenistic set of behaviors out there, that as long as women are seen as tokens, it's going to reinforce that kind of behavior. And that, again, why we need to increase the representation and diversity across the board.
Right. So I want to say hi to Emily Hofer, and I see Lorraine and Dion. We are at Refresh, once again, a place where it's great to come together. We're always a bit better for it. Today we're with, I'm going to hold your book up, David Smith and Brad Johnson. Good guys, clearly good guys. I could ask why you, but actually I want to spend more time on your research and giving us some more of the insight. I think it's probably good to talk about who's getting it right. Who are a good example of companies out there, or leaders that are creating the culture and supporting women in a way that women feel positive about it? What are some of the things you're seeing? And anybody else who's seeing things out there, please send them our way. We'll share them.
Yeah, well, I'll start with
You wanna-
one. We've got a bunch. I know, Dave, you probably want to share the Massachusetts, example that we have that I think is terrific. But I would give a shout out to PNC Bank. Interestingly, PNC Bank, a number of years ago, under the leadership of Josh Stewart, began to launch a male allies program, grassroots within PNC. And they're aligned with the women's ERG, but these are guys, grassroots, who get it. They care about gender equity for different reasons, but they want to be part of the solution. So rather than do anything grandiose or proclaim, hey, we're allies, they just started a community of guys who get together to talk about better ally strategies for their female colleagues. And so they show up with real humility. They learn, they read together, they'll go conduct exercises where they ask female colleagues some of these questions that might help them be better aware of what their trusted friends are experiencing. And then they align with their female colleagues and say, hey, what can our group do to move the needle? How can we promote the women's ERG, women in leadership? What role can we play that would be most useful? And it's kind of grown, right, from this grassroots movement. It's moving across PNC Bank, but we thought that was such a nice model. As how do I grow a community of male allyship? PNC, I think, is getting it right.
Oh, okay, that's great. PNC, one of our board members is actually a board member of PNC. We'll have to get him to talk a little bit about that. That's
And
good,
someone just asked ERG. I'm sorry, that's an employee resource group. ERG. Yep.
right? Okay, well, you guys also mentioned PNG has a program that seems to be working well.
Yeah.
Reverse mentoring.
Yeah, I can go ahead and mention that too. Procter and Gamble. So a number of years ago, Procter and Gamble realized, hey, we're bringing in all these talented junior women. We are not retaining them. We're not promoting them into significant leadership. We're losing them. What's wrong? And as they began to do exit interviews and talk to women who are leaving, they found out mentoring and sponsorship was almost non-existent. So they asked men to start taking a pledge, a 36-minute pledge. Will you spend 30 minutes a week deliberately mentoring a junior woman? Take her to coffee, ask her about her career next steps and how you can contribute. Spend 5 minutes a week telling a woman that you work with how great some win or achievement was that she accomplished. And then spend 1 minute telling other people in senior leadership what she accomplished. So doing that more public sponsorship. And that has started to make a difference in terms of mentoring, sponsorship, pushing more women into leadership at Procter and Gamble. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
JP Morgan. That was JP Morgan. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of our viewers just said something really interesting, and I think powerful observation. Our president-elect just announced an all-female communications team. How powerful is that? What kind of message does that send?
Yeah, I think even beyond that, which is terrific, and again, I think we need a representation of all kinds of voices at the table, right? Especially when it comes to creating policy and making these kinds of decisions that affect so many people's lives. And I also love, as he's picking his cabinet, right, and selecting all these, again, key decision makers and policy makers. There's such a great diversity as we look across the board at everyone there, and now I think it was Janet Yellen was just recently announced and running the economy. And we need more of that, right? Begin 50% or 51, 52%, depending on where you look at the numbers of where we are in the population. They need to be represented. We all need to be represented there in the key areas where, again, if we're making important decisions about people's lives, then we need to be all represented there. And I love the way that, President-elect Biden and his team are moving forward and announcing and looking at these.
Yeah, it does set a great example, right? We need role models. We need to see how others do it. When guys, so we talked a little bit about this, right? So you mentioned men really want to be involved in their families, a great deal of them, right? A lot more than they are, but they don't feel they have permission, right? So as much as we want women are in the workplace, they can talk about their families, or they can't because they feel it puts them in the women's slot. And yet, if families are important to us as a people, right, then we all have to feel free to talk about our families and take care of them. And you are not considered more than or less than. We are considered equal in the love of elevating something so elemental to human life.
Yeah, I think it's been one of the one of the silver linings of the pandemic has been a really putting a microscope to lots of different social issues. One of them being caregiving, and the fact that in our country, and it is unique to the United States, that again we look at caregiving as this individual choice. That there isn't, it's like, well, you can choose to have children, for example, and it's not just children for caregiving, right? There's other people, and especially those of us kind of in the sandwich generation, where we're in many cases caring for our parents and at the same time caring for children out there. But caregiving is not an individual choice. It's something that we're all part of. We just haven't acknowledged that, and not only not acknowledged it, we haven't put any value to it. The fact that, can we put a number of actually a monetary value to caregiving? Yep, we've done it recently. And again, depending on the state and where you are, that number varies quite a bit, but there's a monetary value you can put on that. Why don't we treat it that way? Why don't we have policy that supports it? Because largely it's been, again, men who are not seeing themselves in that caregiving role, or certainly not seen it as a positive value for us to be in those caregiving roles and to talk about it, that we don't have the policies that support that. And it's hard to advocate for something that, that supposedly we don't even need, right? If I'm not supposed to be doing those things out there, then why do I need the policy? Right. And so again, people advocate for the things that
I would say having all women in a communications thing is like a first big step, because there are people who are thinking about that. And I don't want to over stereotype that either. I can't say all women are going to be pro family policymakers either, right? That does everyone a disjustice, an injustice. So let's do this, because we don't have that much more time. Debbie Buckland said, we'll know we've made progress when the next time we do this show, we'll have 50% men. But I have to tell you that being a speaker at diversity and inclusion conferences and on panels all over the country, we're always put it in a room where people of color and women show up, and they are not the people who need the message, right? But today we have people who are carriers of the message, who can implement it. Women, right? We are a big part of this. We have men allies and colleagues. We have to figure out how to create that duality in creating change. So we're starting from ground zero, guys. Give us our first, we've done it once before, but I want to reiterate. There are people and companies here who have large male populations who are trying to figure out, how do I get them to take the next step and step after that, of realization that respecting, including, and creating this equitable place for women is really important to not only my company, but me. What do they do? What do we do?
Yeah, I think real quick, and I'll give Brad can add on to this, but I think one of the things that is senior leaders, especially, but all leaders and managers out there have got to become comfortable talking about this and understanding what, why this is important to them. And this is one of the things that we work with men on, and is, hey, you have to come up with your own kind of a elevator pitch or personal narrative, whatever you want to think about it, about why this is important to you personally. And whatever that is, it's different for each person, but it has to be very authentic. And then you got to connect it to the business. Because if, as a senior leader, if I'm out there saying, yeah, this is really important, you should hire more women, or you should advance more women, but I don't connect it to the business outcome, it's not gonna sink in when you get down to the middle manager level, especially, right? The people that are actually implementing these things on a day-to-day basis have lots of things on their plate, and if there's one more thing you add on that doesn't have a connection to their business, to the business outcome, it's probably not going to be there. And then you got to be really transparent about why you're doing it. Again, back to the business outcome, you need to have the why. And you have to be transparent to your company, to your employees in the company about, hey, these are the goals, these are the initiatives, here's how we're doing, here's where we stand compared to others, here's best in class in our industry, here's how we compare to others out there. Be transparent about it, because it develops trust with your employees. And oh, by the way, if you're looking for investors or for future employees, which most people are, it builds trust with them too, because people are looking today to where they're going to invest their money, who they're going to get, who they want to work for today. And the last part is then you have to incorporate the accountability measures. So a company like Facebook, for example, that was in the news not too long ago, where now all their vice presidents and directors and above on their semi-annual performance reviews are held accountable. They're now, the goals there are held accountable for that in their performance reviews. Have your chief diversity officer not report to the chief of HR, have them report to the chief of operations, have them report to the CEO, right? Connected to the business. This is why it's so critically important. We've got to get it out of, again, love HR and love that world. Very important functions they provide within our organizations. But something like this has got to be shown why it's important to the business.
Well, let me just say this. I think future of work, we've done some work on the future of work. We've had people on, like there's 40 million jobs opened, right? And if you underemploy your people, or you undertrain your people because you think they can't do something because of their gender, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, right? Debbie Buckland wanted to know if you observe two paths. One where large companies make progress and smaller businesses stay stuck in the old ways. So is there a dichotomy between large businesses and small businesses? Sometimes I think counterintuitively, small businesses may be a little bit more nimble, but then again, large companies have a lot of other benefits and scale. You guys see anything related to that?
Well, I think that, this again comes down to Dave's point about accountability. And so one of the upsides of large corporations is they're often beholden to a board and stockholders, right? And stockholders and investors are now asking, show us what you're doing when it comes to inclusion and equity, and show us the money. And it's a performance issue for senior leaders in those organizations. So I think that's an upside. Sometimes a small company, can kind of get by in the old boys network, not changing anything because they don't have that external accountability. So, unless you have a senior leader who really gets it and wants to role model that for everyone, he may not have any other accountability in a smaller organization.
Right. I did want to add, I got this really nice thing. It's really a kudos to both of you gentlemen from Joy Kurtz. And we had the mayor of a town in New Jersey. Her name is Shelley Brindle on. And she said that you can't fix everyone, but you can inspire everyone. And Joy has that put up on her board. And that phrase seems applicable to this conversation for her today as well. And so, and I had other people said, we want to meet these guys. We want to get this work exposed. And we think this is so important. I want to mention that Vital Voices, Sherry, if you have that graphic, Vital Voices is a global organization that empowers women around the world. Elise Nelson, who I believe many of you who are familiar with Generation W would know, she's come and spoken twice. They have taken a major initiative. I don't know, it always seems like if I'm working in my corner and Elise is working in ours, we somehow connect. And as it says, it takes everyone. It's hashtag allyship in action. And they are putting together a global movement. I think they've done some research. David, you might want to take a look at it. They've asked 18,000 women around the world the values that are important to them about creating this initiative. And there's a commitment pledge that we can all sign on to. I think it's really worthwhile because I do think this is the kind of thing where connectivity, right? Holding hands together, we can make a difference. And you guys are a great engine for that. And we appreciate that. Oh, I was just seeing if there's one more question, if anybody wanted to ask. I am going to, how many companies have taken the first step of looking at pay equity and leveling the playing field? I mean, that's something, I mean, that is an important thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not, the one interesting thing about this, and it gets to the point that, you can do a pay equity audit and you find the deltas in there and you find where there's gaps and you fix the gaps, right? The challenge then how do you, if you don't continue to hold that accountability for that system, it will be back within about 2 or 3 years. So one of the things you need to do is do it periodically on some sort of a regular basis.
Right.
The second part, and probably even more important, is why are we creating these gaps? In the meantime, I mean, obviously you can hold yourself accountable by having a little check and balance there by doing it every few years. But in the meantime, why are these equity gaps being created? Why is it there? And start looking at the process. And that's, and I love, again, Sherry Brindle's, her comment about, inspiring everyone, and you can't fix everyone. No, but we can fix the process. And that, again, too often we focus on individuals and bad behavior. And again, we have to hold people accountable. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but at the same time, we need to look at the process and the practices that are causing these inequities.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. And listen, it starts at birth. I know that sounds funny, and I'll explain it in a second, but I usually take a couple of things as I take notes, and I love when you said, for men to start with, am I doing my share? Because Brad, as you said, right, it all begins at home. And it not only begins at home in the division of labor, but it begins at home with how we raise our kids and how they see their roles in the world, and how free are they to express themselves and accept others in terms of, strong masculinity or strong femininity, but people that live on a continuum of values. And I think that's so important. So I like this also this idea of going home to do an audit, a domestic audit. Thank you so much. Let me just show you the book one more time. Good Guys, How Men Can Be Better Allies for Women in the Workplace. Let me stay with me another minute or two. I have this really adorable video I want to share with you coming up. Okay, let's do the video first. I think that makes the most sense. Take a look at this.
Oh, hey everyone, Chestnut here. You know me, toy influencer, style icon, and most importantly, Santa's head elf. I'm basically number one around here. Well, okay, Santa's number one. I'm more like 1.5, but it's my job to bring the North Pole into the 21st century. And so, welcome to the first video of our new, exclusive, behind-the-scenes web channel, Workshop Live. That's right, we're holding all our elf meetings online, and you out there, you've got a front row seat.
Yes. So next week we all have a front row seat, and that number one elf's name is Telly Leung. He is a genuine Broadway star. He played Aladdin in Aladdin on Broadway. He's a recording artist, producer. He's a theater arts teacher. He is just a wonderful person. Some of his other credits include Wicked, Rent, Allegiance. He had a role on Glee. And now he's with a group of equally talented friends and producers who will be releasing what they're calling a Zoomsicle. Yes, a Zoomsicle called The Nice List. And that was a part of the Nice List. So we're going to get to see some of that next week. And it's a lift for the holiday for all of us. And everyone who joins us will get a free link for the show to share with their families. We're so excited about that. And also be able to talk about the value of arts and what are arts doing today, obviously in the time of COVID. And I think it's just going to be incredibly uplifting and interesting, a time with Telly Leung. So I hope you'll be with us next week. Perhaps you'll have your bottles of Grenache Rosé and Chardonnay from Tenerol Cellars next week, so we could have a mid-sip, maybe like a little holiday celebration. That is a definite Freudian slip. We'll have a midday celebration, sip with Telly, as we talk about the power of arts in our lives and get the preview of the Nice List. Thank you, Jill, for that. And lastly, a special thank you to Christina and our team. Obviously, Sherry and Jamie are great producers for today, and Stacy and Mariah and Ruth, and let's see, who else is out there? Tara, for all the hard work, not only Refresh, but so many of the ongoing programs that we undertake to elevate the lives of girls and women and our inclusive communities of Gen W. It continues to be a tough go for our kids. We all know that. We want to do so much to keep them vibrant and connected, not feeling lonely. And so our ongoing work with Generation WOW remains front and center. And I want to thank Mom Erica, this little video I'm going to share with you now, one of our great moms who had this to share with us.
Generation WOW was a perfect opportunity for my 15-year-old daughter this summer, coming off of a very unprecedented year with homeschooling, some of the social and racial unrest. It was really nice for her to feel connected to a cohort of fellow young ladies and have a safe zone of conversation on topics like you're not alone, finding your passion, and understanding the power of connection.
Yes, the power of connection. And that's exactly what we have here on Refresh. Thanks for all of your support, Brad and David. David, I'm so grateful To Dr. Orender Johnson at the Naval War College, where you teach, where she teaches. She's on our board and a tremendous contributor for introducing us. Consider us allies in your work. I hope this is not the first and last opportunity we have to support. Your work is really important. We thank you. Have a great holiday. And everyone, see you next week with the #1 elf from the North Pole, Telly Ling. Bye, everyone.